The old biker had already accepted that no one was coming. His gray beard was stained with dust and blood as 6 young men circled him outside a forgotten gas station on the edge of town. Their laughter echoed across the empty parking lot while frightened customers watched from behind the glass windows, too terrified to move. Every second made the beating worse. Every punch stole another piece of the old man's strength. Then, out of nowhere, a 16-year-old black teenager sprinted into the middle of the violence. He had no weapon, no backup, no plan. Just 8 fearless seconds, that changed his life forever. What happened next shocked an entire motorcycle club, stunned a small American town, and eventually became a story that millions of people would never forget. Before we begin, if you believe kindness is stronger than hate, courage is more powerful than fear, and every human being deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like this video. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Share this story with someone who still believes in humanity, and subscribe for more emotional stories that restore faith in people. The town of Ash Creek wasn't the kind of place people noticed on maps. It sat quietly beside an aging highway where truckers stopped for coffee, travelers filled their tanks, and locals exchanged the same conversations every morning. Everyone knew everyone, yet somehow loneliness still lived there. 16-year-old Elijah Carter understood loneliness better than most. His mother worked double shifts cleaning offices in the nearby city. His father had disappeared before Elijah could remember his face. Every afternoon after school, Elijah walked nearly 3 miles to help Mr. Henderson at a small repair garage. The old mechanic couldn't afford to pay much, but he always found a few dollars to hand the teenager along with leftovers for dinner. Life had taught Elijah that dignity wasn't measured by money. It was measured by how someone treated people who could offer nothing in return. Still, not everyone shared that belief. At school, Elijah constantly battled whispers, insults, and assumptions. Some classmates saw only the color of his skin before they noticed his grades, his kindness, or the way he quietly helped younger students carry heavy backpacks. Teachers admired him. Friends trusted him, but prejudice lingered like invisible smoke that refused to disappear. Instead of becoming bitter, Elijah became stronger. Every hardship had sharpened his heart instead of hardening it. Every disappointment made him determined to become the kind of man his younger self had needed. On one unusually hot Saturday afternoon, Mr. Henderson asked Elijah to deliver a repaired alternator to another mechanic across town. The trip required walking past an old gas station that had seen better days. Rust covered the fuel pumps, faded signs swung in the breeze, and cracked concrete stretched beneath the blazing summer sun. As Elijah approached, he noticed something unusual. Several motorcycles were parked beside the building. Not ordinary motorcycles, heavy cruisers polished until they reflected the afternoon light. One rider remained near the bikes, while others had apparently gone inside. The lone biker looked to be nearly 70 years old. His leather vest carried countless patches earned over decades of riding roads few people ever experienced. His face looked weathered but peaceful. He reminded Elijah of the veterans who gathered outside the local diner every Veterans Day. Just another older man enjoying a quiet afternoon, or so it seemed. A pickup truck suddenly screeched into the parking lot. 6 young men climbed out. Their expressions carried the reckless confidence that often comes from believing there will never be consequences. Nobody knew exactly what started the confrontation. Perhaps it was an insult. Perhaps someone recognized the biker. Perhaps they simply wanted someone vulnerable to intimidate. Whatever the reason, the shouting quickly turned physical. The oldest man stumbled backward. One punch landed, then another. The 6 attackers surrounded him before he could regain his balance. Customers inside the gas station froze. One woman covered her child's eyes. The cashier reached for the phone with shaking hands. Everyone watched. Nobody moved. Fear can paralyze even good people. Elijah stood across the street holding the alternator. For one brief second, his mind told him to keep walking. After all, he was only 16. The attackers were older, larger, angrier. He couldn't possibly stop them. Then another voice rose inside him. It sounded remarkably like his mother's. She always said that courage wasn't the absence of fear. Courage was choosing compassion despite fear, without thinking another moment. Elijah ran. The distance disappeared beneath his feet. 8 seconds. That was all it took. He reached the circle of attackers and shoved the first bully away with every ounce of strength he possessed. The unexpected impact created confusion. Before anyone understood what was happening, Elijah positioned himself directly between the old biker and the remaining attackers. His arms spread wide, his breathing heavy, his knees trembling. He wasn't trying to fight, he was trying to protect. The bullies hesitated. They hadn't expected resistance, especially not from a skinny teenager. Their confidence cracked just enough for the moment to change. One attacker stepped forward. Another looked nervously toward the convenience store where more people had begun gathering. The spell of violence had broken. Suddenly, witnesses were recording with their phones. Someone shouted that police had been called. The attackers exchanged uncertain glances before climbing back into their truck and speeding away. Silence returned almost as quickly as chaos had arrived. Elijah slowly turned toward the injured biker. Blood trickled from the man's forehead. His breathing sounded painful. Without hesitation, Elijah knelt beside him, removed his own hoodie despite the heat, folded it carefully, and placed it beneath the man's head. Then he simply stayed there, holding the stranger's hand, making sure he wasn't alone. The ambulance arrived minutes later. Police officers questioned witnesses while paramedics treated the injured rider. Before being loaded into the ambulance, the old biker reached weakly toward Elijah. His tired eyes filled with gratitude that words couldn't fully express. Elijah smiled, then quietly picked up the dusty alternator that had fallen during the commotion. He continued walking to finish the errand Mr. Henderson had trusted him with. He assumed that would be the end of the story. He couldn't have been more mistaken. The injured biker's name was Samuel Grizzly Walker. Few people in Ash Creek recognized him, but thousands of bikers across America certainly did. Grizzly wasn't simply another motorcycle enthusiast. He had spent decades organizing charity rides for children's hospitals, disaster relief fundraisers, and veteran support organizations. Though his appearance intimidated strangers, those who truly knew him understood that his greatest strength had always been generosity. For years, he quietly donated thousands of volunteer hours without seeking recognition. His leather patches represented loyalty, sacrifice, and brotherhood. News of the assault spread rapidly through biker communities. Even more astonishing was the story of the teenager who had rushed into overwhelming danger without asking who the victim was, without asking what club he belonged to, without caring how different they looked. Within 48 hours, motorcycles began arriving in Ash Creek. Then dozens more, soon hundreds. The thunder of engines rolled through town like distant storms. Residents peeked through curtains. Business owners stepped outside. Many feared retaliation instead. They witnessed something completely different. Long lines of bikers parked peacefully along Main Street. Flowers appeared outside the gas station. Veterans saluted. Church members served free meals. Police officers shook hands with riders they had never expected to meet under peaceful circumstances. At the center of it all stood Elijah, confused, embarrassed, completely overwhelmed. Grizzly had insisted on meeting him after leaving the hospital. The older man walked slowly because of his injuries, but determination carried him every step. When they finally stood face to face again, cameras quietly captured a moment nobody expected. Grizzly removed one of the patches from his old leather vest, not one representing rank, not one representing status. It was a small patch stitched with simple words, "Guardians protect." He carefully placed it into Elijah's hands. No speech, no dramatic performance, only tears. The teenager looked at the worn piece of fabric as though it were priceless, because it was, not for its monetary value, but because it represented something larger than either of them. It symbolized respect earned through action. News organizations quickly picked up the remarkable story. Television stations wanted interviews. Newspapers called daily. Social media exploded with clips showing the teenager standing alone against 6 attackers. Millions watched. Millions commented. Millions argued over what they would have done. Yet the people who knew Elijah best weren't surprised. Mr. Henderson simply smiled when reporters asked whether the teenager had always been brave. He explained that courage wasn't something Elijah discovered that afternoon. It was something he practiced every single day through small acts of kindness nobody else noticed. helping elderly neighbors carry groceries, fixing bicycles for children who couldn't afford repairs, walking classmates home when bullying became too much. Heroism rarely begins during extraordinary moments. It begins during ordinary ones. As attention grew, something unexpected happened. Letters poured in from every corner of the country. Veterans thanked Elijah for honoring an older generation. Parents said they showed the story to their children before school each morning. Teachers used it to discuss courage, empathy, and character. Even former gang members wrote about how the story inspired them to choose different paths. One envelope contained exactly $12. Inside was a handwritten note from an elderly widow. She apologized that it wasn't much, explaining she lived only on her pension. She simply wanted Elijah to know that his kindness reminded her of the husband she had lost years earlier. Elijah cried while reading it because he finally understood. The world hadn't fallen in love with one brave moment. People had fallen in love with hope. Hope that strangers could still protect strangers. Hope that courage still existed. Hope that compassion could interrupt violence. Months later, the abandoned gas station looked completely different. Local volunteers had transformed it into a community center, where young people learned motorcycle repair, welding, and mechanical skills from retired veterans and experienced bikers. Grizzly became one of the instructors. Mr. Henderson volunteered every weekend. Elijah taught younger kids everything he knew. The place once remembered for violence became known for opportunity. Every repaired engine represented another repaired future. Every lesson reminded someone that broken things could work again, including people. Years later, visitors still asked about the famous parking lot where one teenager stood against impossible odds. Older residents always answered the same way. They pointed not toward the cracked pavement, but toward the smiling young mechanics helping neighborhood children fix bicycles. That's where the real miracle happened, they would say. Because saving one life in 8 seconds was extraordinary, teaching others to save lives every day, that became a legacy. The greatest heroes are rarely the strongest. They are the people who refuse to let fear decide who deserves help. On that ordinary afternoon, a teenager with empty pockets and a fearless heart reminded an entire nation that real strength isn't measured by fists, money, or reputation. It is measured by the moment you choose to stand between someone else's pain and the people causing it. And sometimes, 8 seconds of courage can echo for generations. The headlines faded within weeks, but the lives changed forever. For Elijah Carter, the hardest part wasn't facing 6 bullies. It was waking up the next morning and discovering that the entire country suddenly knew his name. Reporters parked outside Mr. Henderson's repair shop before sunrise. Television vans lined the street. Journalists wanted dramatic interviews, emotional sound bites, and heroic speeches. Elijah had none to give. He simply repeated that he had done what he hoped anyone would do. Those words spread even faster than the story itself. Meanwhile, Samuel Grizzly Walker recovered slowly. Broken ribs healed, bruises disappeared, but one thought never left his mind. At 70 years old, after decades of riding across America, he believed he understood courage. Then a teenager had taught him a new definition. Courage wasn't the loudest person in the room. It was the one who stepped forward when everyone else stepped back. Grizzly returned to Ash Creek 6 weeks later, not with a parade, but with a purpose. Instead of thanking Elijah with gifts, he proposed something far greater. He wanted to build a future. The abandoned repair garage beside Mr. Henderson's shop had sat empty for nearly 15 years. Broken windows, leaking roof, rusted equipment, it looked beyond saving. Most people saw junk. Grizzly saw possibility. Within days, volunteers arrived from neighboring towns. Mechanics donated tools. Welders repaired steel beams. Carpenters rebuilt walls. Electricians rewired the building free of charge. People who had never met Elijah wanted to honor what he had done by creating opportunities for other young people. Elijah worked alongside them every afternoon after school, sweeping floors, painting walls, learning skills, teaching younger kids. The project slowly transformed into the Carter Community Garage, named not after fame but after character. Young people who had struggled in school suddenly found purpose rebuilding old motorcycles and restoring classic cars. Retired veterans became mentors. Local business owners offered apprenticeships. Students who once believed they had no future discovered talents they never knew they possessed. Even some of the teenagers who had bullied Elijah years earlier quietly walked through the doors. Ashamed, embarrassed, unsure whether they would be welcomed, Elijah never mentioned the past. He simply handed them work gloves because forgiveness often speaks louder than revenge. Months later, one of those former bullies admitted that watching Elijah help everyone, including people who had once mocked him, had changed his own life. He earned his mechanic's certification. Another enrolled in community college. Another reconciled with his family. None of them changed overnight, but someone had finally believed they could become better. That belief became contagious. Every Saturday, motorcycles filled the parking lot, not for fights, but for charity rides. They raised money for children's hospitals, collected food for struggling families, purchased school supplies, paid utility bills for elderly neighbors who quietly needed help. The same engines that once frightened people now announced hope. Years passed. Elijah graduated at the top of his vocational program and became a respected automotive engineer while continuing to volunteer every weekend at the community garage. Mr. Henderson eventually retired, smiling as he watched the young man he had once mentored become a mentor himself. Grizzly never missed a Saturday. His beard turned whiter. His steps grew slower. But his smile became brighter every time another teenager successfully repaired an engine for the first time. One autumn afternoon, nearly a decade after the incident at the gas station, hundreds gathered outside the community garage. A new sign was unveiled. It read 8 Seconds Community Center. Beneath it, smaller letters carried a simple message. One act of courage can inspire a lifetime of kindness. Elijah stood quietly in the crowd. He didn't see a building, he saw children laughing, families reunited, dreams restored. He saw proof that compassion never ends with one moment, it multiplies. Before the ceremony concluded, Grizzly handed Elijah a small wooden box. Inside was the faded Guardians Protect patch that Elijah had carefully preserved all those years. Alongside it rested a handwritten note. That day you believed one life was worth risking your own. Never forget, you didn't just save me. You reminded countless people that goodness still has a place in this world. Tears filled Elijah's eyes. He realized the greatest reward had never been recognition. It was watching others choose kindness because they had witnessed kindness first. Long after television cameras disappeared, long after headlines were forgotten, the legacy remained. Not in newspapers, not on social media, but in every young person who walked into that garage believing they mattered. Sometimes history isn't written by famous people. Sometimes it begins with an ordinary teenager making an extraordinary decision in a single moment. And sometimes the greatest victories are not the ones that make headlines. They're the ones that quietly transform hearts, families, and entire communities for generations. If this fictional story inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe. And before you go, leave a comment answering this question. What would you have done if you had witnessed that moment? Your answer might inspire someone else to choose courage when it matters most.